May 15, 1943. Willow Run, Michigan. The cavernous interior of Ford's mammoth B-24 Liberator bomber plant hummed with activity as 28-year-old assembly line worker Frank Kowalski guided a rivet gun against the aluminum skin of a bomber wing. Outside, spring rains pelted the mile-long factory that had, in less than 2 years, transformed from farmland into the largest factory under a single roof in the world. Frank had no idea that the unassuming man in a pressed suit observing from the visitors' gallery would soon change his life forever. "We'll be producing one of these every hour by summer's end," Frank would later boast to the man who introduced himself as Thomas Schmidt, a Department of War efficiency expert. What neither of them knew was how this casual comment would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately shatter not just Schmidt's cover identity, but his entire worldview about American industrial might. This German intelligence officer, trained to believe in the Third Reich's technological supremacy, was about to witness firsthand the devastating truth behind America's production miracle. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how America's unprecedented manufacturing capability became a psychological weapon as powerful as any bomb, and how one spy's shocking reports back to Berlin revealed the fundamental miscalculation at the heart of Germany's war strategy. The real Thomas Schmidt had died 3 months earlier in Portugal, a minor State Department employee whose identity had been carefully appropriated by SS Hauptsturmführer Kurt Müller of the Sicherheitsdienst, the intelligence agency of the SS. Müller had spent 2 years preparing for this mission, perfecting his American accent through intensive language training, memorizing the minutiae of American culture, and building a flawless cover identity. His mission was straightforward but crucial: assess the true production capabilities of American aircraft factories and report back realistic figures to Berlin. The Führer believes the Americans are incapable of mass-producing quality aircraft. Müller's handler, Standartenführer Wilhelm Hodel, had told him during his final briefing in Berlin. Their decadent, individualistic society cannot match German discipline and engineering. Your mission is to confirm this assessment. Müller had nodded confidently. He had seen the official reports. America was a nation of soft civilians, their factories inefficient, their workers undisciplined. The intelligence from German sympathizers in America suggested that Roosevelt's production promises were propaganda, pure fantasy designed to boost morale. Captain Roger Thornton of Army Intelligence had other ideas. A former history professor at Yale specializing in German military culture, Thornton had been tracking Müller's movements since his arrival in New York 3 weeks earlier. At 46, Thornton was older than most of his colleagues, his hairline receding and his once athletic frame softened by years behind a desk. But his mind remained razor-sharp, especially when it came to understanding the German psyche. "We don't arrest him," Thornton explained to his team in their Detroit field office. "We show him everything. We let him report back exactly what he sees." Lieutenant Maria Diaz, a former industrial efficiency expert at General Motors before joining Army Intelligence, raised an eyebrow. "Sir, with respect, that's counterintuitive. Shouldn't we be concealing our production capabilities?" Thornton smiled. "No, Lieutenant. The Germans won't believe the truth even when their own man reports it. Their ideology won't allow it. But the doubt we plant will be devastating. When reality finally catches up to them in the form of thousands of bombers over their cities, the psychological impact will be twice as powerful." This psychological warfare strategy had been developed based on interrogations of captured German officers who consistently underestimated American industrial capability. Army intelligence had identified this blind spot and was now weaponizing it. Meanwhile, at Ford's massive Willow Run plant, Frank Kowalski was proud of his role in the war effort. The son of Polish immigrants, Frank had particular reason to hate the Nazis after receiving news that his cousins in Warsaw had disappeared during the German occupation. Standing 5 feet 10 inches with powerful forearms developed through 3 years of riveting aircraft components, Frank had initially applied his skills at Ford's automotive plants before transferring to the bomber facility when it opened. The scale of Willow Run was difficult to comprehend even for those who worked there. The main assembly building stretched for over a mile, encompassing 3.5 million square feet of factory floor, the equivalent of 75 football fields under a single roof. At full capacity, it employed over 42,000 workers across 3 shifts. When fully operational, the plant would indeed produce one complete B-24 Liberator bomber every hour, an aircraft with more than 1.55 million parts. Mueller's first tour of the facility was conducted by plant manager Walter Davidson, a stern, efficiency-obsessed engineer who had helped translate automotive assembly line techniques to aircraft production. Each Liberator requires 360,000 rivets, Davidson explained as they walked the floor. In traditional aircraft manufacturing, that would mean weeks of work. We've reduced it to days. Mueller nodded politely while making mental calculations. The numbers seemed impossible. His intelligence briefings had suggested American production of B-24s at perhaps 100 per month across all facilities. What he was seeing suggested that this single plant would soon exceed that. And your quality control? Mueller asked, fishing for weaknesses. Surely speed compromises precision? Davidson pointed to a testing area where completed components underwent stress tests. Our defect rate is actually lower than traditional manufacturing methods. Specialization breeds expertise. A worker who installs the same component 1,000 times becomes extraordinarily proficient. By the 3rd day of his visit, Mueller had been granted access to production data that made his head spin. The plant had produced 42 Liberators in January. By April, monthly production had reached 150. The projected figure for December was 650 from this facility alone. Combined with production from consolidated aircraft plants in San Diego and Fort Worth, plus Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa, America would soon be producing over 1,000 B-24s each month. Mueller's handlers had told him to expect American propaganda inflating numbers by 300 to 400%. But he was seeing the actual bombers rolling off the production line, one after another. Each B-24 carried 8,800 pounds of bombs and could deliver them to targets 2,850 miles away. Each represented the potential destruction of German factories, rail yards, and refineries. On his 4th day, Mueller was introduced to Frank Kowalski, selected to show the efficiency expert the intricacies of the assembly line from a worker's perspective. Been here since they poured the concrete, Frank said proudly as they walked past a section where workers installed 50 caliber machine gun turrets. Used to take us 2 days to install these. Now we do it in 4 hours. Mueller studied Frank carefully. The man showed none of the reluctance or poor morale that German intelligence had attributed to American factory workers. Instead, he moved with purpose, greeted colleagues with genuine camaraderie, and spoke of production targets with personal investment. You work very hard, Mueller observed. Longer hours than were common in American factories before the war, yes? Frank shrugged. My cousin Tadeusz was a schoolteacher in Warsaw. Germans shot him and his entire family in '39. Every bomber we finish might save some other family. I'd work 20 hours if they'd let me. Mueller nodded, concealing his discomfort. This personal connection to the war was something his training hadn't prepared him for. American workers were supposed to be soft, money-motivated, and lacking discipline. Frank defied that stereotype entirely. Over lunch in the vast workers' cafeteria, where 8,500 meals were served per shift, Frank inadvertently delivered the comment that would later become infamous in German intelligence circles. See that bomber there? Frank pointed through the large windows to the final assembly area, where a nearly complete B-24 was receiving its engines. We make these every hour now. Around the clock, 7 days a week. By next year, we might hit one every 50 minutes. Mueller nearly choked on his coffee. 1 per hour meant 24 per day, 720 per month, from this plan alone. The figure was so outlandish that his first instinct was to dismiss it as worker bravado. But he had seen the production floor. He had reviewed the figures. The plant was already at 1 bomber every 2 hours and increasing efficiency weekly. That's impressive, Mueller managed. Frank grinned. You know what's really something? 3 years ago, I was making door panels for Mercury sedans. Now I'm helping build the planes that'll end Hitler. Most of us here never made aircraft before. Some of the women never worked in a factory at all before the war. This comment led Mueller to notice something he had overlooked: the significant presence of women on the assembly line. Nearly a third of the workers were female, many handling complex technical assembly that German industrial doctrine reserved exclusively for men. One section, responsible for the intricate electrical wiring of the bomber's communication systems, was staffed almost entirely by women. Our wiring rejection rate dropped 60% when the women's teams took over, plant manager Davidson later told Mueller. Better attention to detail, more consistent work. We had to overcome some initial resistance, but the results speak for themselves. Mueller's fifth day at Willow Run coincided with a visit from War Department officials, allowing him to observe a detailed production review. The meeting revealed that the plant had not only solved its initial production delays, but was now exceeding targeted output. Weekly production had increased from 10 bombers in January to 38 in early May. The discussion centered not on whether they could meet their goals, but how soon they would exceed them. During a momentary break, Mueller stepped outside to collect his thoughts. The Michigan spring air was cool against his face as he struggled to reconcile what he was witnessing with his preconceptions. He had been trained to spot American propaganda, to see through exaggerated claims. But he wasn't being shown propaganda. He was seeing actual bombers rolling off the production line at a pace German aircraft production couldn't hope to match. The reality Mueller observed stood in stark contrast to the intelligence assessments he had internalized. Germany's largest aircraft manufacturer, Messerschmitt, had produced a total of 250 Mi-262 jet fighters in all of 1943. Ford's Willow Run plant alone would produce that many Liberator bombers every 11 days by year's end. While Mueller grappled with these revelations, Captain Thornton was meticulously tracking his movements. Army intelligence had arranged Mueller's visit to Willow Run precisely because the facility represented America's industrial transformation most dramatically. They wanted the German spy to see everything and report it accurately. "Has he made contact with his handler yet?" Thornton asked Lieutenant Diaz as they monitored Mueller from their temporary office near the plant. Diaz shook her head. "Not yet, sir. He's scheduled to return to Detroit this evening. We expect he'll attempt to send a report within 48 hours. Thornton nodded. "When he does, we let it through. Whatever he's seen here will be far more damaging to German morale than any disinformation we could feed them." Meanwhile, Frank had been briefed on his role. He believed Thomas Schmidt was a potential security risk, possibly a corporate spy from another aircraft manufacturer rather than a foreign agent. His instructions were simply to show the visitor everything without embellishment. The truth was propaganda enough. On the final day of his visit, Mueller was shown the most impressive feature of the Willow Run operation: the logistics system that kept the massive plant supplied. A dedicated railway spur delivered aluminum, steel, wiring, engines, and other components directly to the factory. Each day, 475 railcars arrived bearing raw materials and parts from 1,500 different suppliers across America. The components were tracked through an IBM punch card system that allowed managers to locate any part within the sprawling facility. "Last month, we processed 56,000 tons of material through this plant," explained logistics manager Eleanor Patterson, a formidable woman in her 50s who had previously managed department store supply chains. "The German Bf-109 fighter uses about 6,000 parts. Our B-24 uses 1.55 million. Managing that complexity is our real achievement." Mueller nodded, his mind spinning with implications. The Willow Run logistics system alone was more sophisticated than anything he had seen in German aircraft manufacturing. And this was just one of dozens of major aircraft facilities across America. On his last afternoon, Mueller found himself alone with Frank in a section of the plant where completed wing assemblies were being attached to fuselages. "You seem to know a lot about aircraft production," Mueller commented casually, testing whether Frank might have noticed his particular interest in production figures. Frank laughed. 3 years ago, I couldn't tell a bomber from a cargo plane. But that's America for you. Last week, I met a girl on the hydraulics team who was a beautician before the war. Now she's calibrating flight control systems." Mueller nodded. "And morale? Working such long hours must be difficult." Frank gestured toward a wall where workers had pinned photographs, many showing young men in military uniforms. Everyone here has someone over there. Brother, husband, son. Every hour we shave off production might mean one less Gold Star mother. The phrase was unfamiliar to Mueller, and his confusion must have shown. Gold Star mothers, women who've lost sons in the war, Frank explained. Nobody here wants that telegram coming to their home. So we work fast, we work hard, and we don't complain. As Mueller left Willow Run that evening, he struggled to process everything he had witnessed. His training had prepared him to see through American propaganda, to identify weaknesses and exaggerations. Instead, he had found an industrial juggernaut that exceeded even America's public claims. That night in his Detroit hotel room, Mueller began composing his report to Berlin. He stared at the blank paper for nearly an hour, knowing that what he was about to write would be dismissed as either incompetence or American disinformation. Yet he could not bring himself to downplay what he had seen. His duty was to report facts, however uncomfortable. Willow Run facility currently producing one B-24 Liberator bomber every 2 hours, he wrote. Production rate increasing weekly with projected output of 1 per hour by August 1943. Facility employs 42,000 workers across 3 shifts. Worker morale exceptionally high due to personal connections to war effort. Quality control superior to our manufacturing standards despite higher production rate. He paused, then added the observation that would later be highlighted and questioned in Berlin. American production methodology fundamentally different from our approach. They have successfully applied automotive mass production techniques to aircraft manufacturing, achieving economies of scale previously thought impossible. Estimate total American bomber production capacity at minimum 3 to 4 times our current intelligence assessments. In his Detroit field office, Captain Thornton received word that Mueller had made contact with his handler through a prearranged dead drop at the Detroit Public Library. As planned, they had allowed the communication to proceed. Now we wait, Thornton told his team. The seeds of doubt have been planted. What Mueller didn't know was that Frank Kowalski had been more than just a guide. As the grandson of Polish immigrants who maintained connections to family in Warsaw, Frank had received basic counterintelligence training after volunteering to help identify potential security risks at the plant. It was Frank who had first noticed Mueller's unusual interest in production figures and alerted security. While Mueller was drafting his report, Frank was providing his own assessment to Army intelligence. He tried to hide it, but I could see he was shocked by our numbers, Frank explained to Lieutenant Diaz. When I told him we make a bomber every hour, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. 2 weeks later, Mueller's report reached Berlin, where it landed on the desk of Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe. Göring's initial reaction was dismissal bordering on outrage. Preposterous, he declared to his staff. 1 bomber per hour? The Americans are theatrical people. They constructed a Potemkin factory to impress and deceive this agent. But Mueller's impeccable record and detailed observations could not be entirely dismissed. His report included specific production methodologies that aligned with emerging intelligence from other sources. Most concerningly, aerial reconnaissance was indeed showing massive increases in bomber formations over Europe. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, took Mueller's report more seriously. With a background in architecture and engineering, Speer understood the implications of Ford's manufacturing innovations. If the Americans have truly adapted assembly line production to aircraft manufacturing at this scale, we have gravely miscalculated, Speer warned Hitler during a production briefing in June 1943. 1 factory producing 24 heavy bombers daily equals our entire monthly production. Hitler dismissed these concerns, attributing them to American propaganda that had fooled a single agent. But doubt had been planted exactly as Captain Thornton had intended. When bomber formations over Germany grew from dozens to hundreds, German military leadership began reluctantly acknowledging the production disparity. By October 1943, the Strategic Bombing Survey would show over 1,000 American heavy bombers striking German targets in a single day, tangible proof of Mueller's warnings. The psychological impact was exactly as Thornton had predicted. German pilots reported feeling overwhelmed not just by American tactics, but by the sheer, unending waves of aircraft. Luftwaffe ace Major Heinrich Oehler, who had claimed 208 aerial victories on the Eastern Front, wrote in his diary after facing American bomber formations over Bremen, "They are endless. We shoot down 10, and 50 take their place. How can they build so many? Our intelligence has failed us completely." Meanwhile, back at Willow Run, Frank Kowalski had been promoted to section supervisor, overseeing a team of 120 workers installing cockpit instrumentation. The plant had achieved its goal of 1 bomber per hour in August 1943, ahead of schedule, and was working toward further improvements. The human stories behind this industrial achievement were equally remarkable. Sarah Connor, a 19-year-old who had never held a wrench before Pearl Harbor, became one of the most skilled hydraulic systems specialists at the plant. "My brother is a navigator on a B-24, she explained during a plant newspaper interview. "Every time I tighten a fitting or check a line, I imagine I'm doing it for his plane." The plant's demographics challenged every German preconception about American society. Alongside women making up nearly 40% of the workforce by late 1943, Willow Run employed over 6,000 African-American workers. Charles Washington, who supervised an engine-mounting team of 85 people, had faced discrimination in his previous job as a janitor at a smaller factory. "Here, what matters is what you can do, not what you look like," he told a War Department efficiency evaluator. "I've got white folks, colored folks, women, men, even a one-armed fellow on my team. Best damn engine installers in Michigan." The workers developed a distinctive culture that blended urgency with precision. "Hot and good" became the unofficial motto, meaning work had to be both fast and flawless. Quality Control Inspector Helen Martinez developed a reputation for her uncompromising standards. "Send it up good or don't send it up at all," was her constant refrain. "There's a boy who'll bet his life on your work." This culture of accountability extended through every level of production. When a minor hydraulic leak was discovered during final inspection of a bomber, an entire shift stayed 3 hours late to identify the root cause and implement a permanent fix. As shift supervisor Tony Reeves put it, "We're not building washing machines here. Every plane has to be perfect." On a brisk November morning, Frank arrived for his shift to find Captain Thornton waiting for him in the employee entrance. "Your German visitor made quite an impression back in Berlin, Mr. Kowalski," Thornton said with a thin smile, though I doubt they believed him at first. Frank looked surprised. He was really German intelligence? "I figured he might be, but wasn't certain. I never thought my casual comment would have such impact." Thornton nodded. SS Hauptsturmführer Kurt Mueller, one of their better agents. "Your comment about producing a bomber every hour has apparently become something of a legend in German intelligence circles. Initially dismissed as impossible, now haunting them as they see the results over their cities." "What happened to him?" Frank asked. "Recalled to Berlin in July. Our sources suggest he's been reassigned to the Eastern Front, the traditional fate of bearers of bad news in the Third Reich." For Mueller, the consequences of his accurate reporting had indeed been severe. Upon his return to Berlin, he had been interrogated repeatedly, his loyalty questioned. Though he maintained that his observations were accurate, the ideological resistance to accepting American production superiority was too entrenched. "It is not merely about factories and raw materials," Mueller tried to explain during his final debriefing. "Their system harnesses individual motivation differently. Workers see themselves as directly contributing to victory. Women who never worked in industry are becoming skilled technicians within weeks. Their production methods eliminate bottlenecks we consider inevitable." But such assessments contradicted Nazi ideology about American decadence and inefficiency. Mueller was transferred to an infantry unit on the Eastern Front in August 1943. His intelligence career effectively ended. His final report included an assessment that would prove prophetic. The war was likely lost the moment the Ford Motor Company turned its production expertise to bomber manufacturing. By December 1943, the Willow Run plant reached its peak efficiency, producing 650 B-24 Liberators in a single month, 1 bomber every 63 minutes. By war's end, the facility had built over 8,600 bombers, and Ford's manufacturing innovations had been adopted by aircraft plants nationwide. The industrial disparity Mueller had warned about became starkly evident by 1944. American factories produced 96,318 aircraft that year, compared to Germany's 39,807. More telling was the comparison of bomber production. America built 35,003 bombers in 1944, while Germany managed just 5,235. By early 1944, the consequences of this production mismatch were visible in the skies over Germany. On February 20th, 1944, Operation Argument, known as Big Week, saw more than 1,000 American bombers and 800 fighters strike German aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe, despite desperate efforts, could not replace aircraft losses at even a fraction of the American rate. Lieutenant Maria Diaz, who had been instrumental in the psychological operations surrounding Mueller's visit, was assigned to analyze captured German documents relating to aircraft production in late 1944. What she found confirmed everything they had hoped to achieve. Their initial response was denial, she reported to Thornton, followed by accusations that Mueller had been compromised. But by mid-1944, their internal memos show panic. A Luftwaffe procurement document from August 1944 specifically references the American hourly bomber production as a benchmark they could never hope to match. The psychological impact extended beyond military circles. Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda, wrote in his diary on March 2, 1944, "The American bombing campaign represents industrial capacity we gravely underestimated. Reports of their production capabilities, which we dismissed as fantasy last year, have proven conservative. The Führer is increasingly concerned." This revelation had powerful effects on German civilian morale as well. Workers in German aircraft factories, once proud of their craftsmanship and technical superiority, now understood they were engaged in an unwinnable production race. A security report from the Messerschmitt factory in Regensburg noted, "Workers increasingly discuss rumors of American factories producing more aircraft in a day than we achieve in a month." Morale has declined correspondingly. Even more telling was the impact on German military strategy. Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland later wrote in his memoirs, "By late 1943, we realized we could never achieve air superiority through quality alone. The quantitative advantage was simply too great. American industry had achieved what our leadership had deemed impossible, quality and quantity simultaneously." At Willow Run, this triumph of American production methodology continued to evolve. By spring 1944, workers had implemented over 6,700 individual process improvements suggested through an employee innovation program. Many came from people who had never worked in manufacturing before the war. One particularly significant innovation came from Dorothy Hayner, a former music teacher who now supervised electrical systems installation. Her team redesigned the wiring harness assembly process, reducing installation time by 35% while improving reliability. When asked how she had developed such expertise so quickly, Hayner explained, "The principles of good design are universal. Whether arranging music or aircraft wiring, clarity and organization matter most." This practical, results-oriented approach contrasted sharply with the more hierarchical German manufacturing culture, where suggestions from workers, especially women, would rarely reach engineering departments. The American system's openness to innovation from all sources created an adaptability that German industry couldn't match. Captain Roger Thornton, promoted to major by war's end, would later write in his classified after-action report, "The most effective psychological warfare often involves simply revealing an uncomfortable truth." The Ford workers' casual comment about hourly bomber production did more damage to German morale than 1,000 propaganda broadcasts. Frank Kowalski remained at Willow Run until the end of the war, eventually helping convert the facility back to civilian automobile production. On his last day working on bombers, he brought his 5-year-old son to see the plant. "Remember this," he told the boy as they watched the final B-24 roll off the assembly line in June 1945. "This is what won the war. Not just the planes, but what they represented. What happens when an entire nation decides to build something together?" In a remarkable postscript, Kurt Mueller survived the war, surrendering to American forces near Dresden in May 1945. During his interrogation, He specifically mentioned his Willow Run experience. I reported exactly what I saw, Mueller told his American interrogator. One bomber every hour. They thought I had been compromised or fooled by propaganda. By the time they believed me, it was too late. The skies were dark with your aircraft. The story of Willow Run remains a testament to American industrial might, but also to the psychological dimension of production capacity. The Ford workers' casual comment, "We make these every hour," represented more than just manufacturing efficiency. It revealed the fundamental miscalculation at the heart of Axis strategy. Germany's leadership, blinded by ideological conviction about American weakness, refused to believe the truth even when presented by their own intelligence. By the time the reality became impossible to deny, thousands of liberators were already darkening the skies above the Third Reich, each one a flying testament to the assembly line workers' boast that had once seemed so impossible. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.